Hi guys, Dino here. With the recent announcements around Tekken 8 and the upcoming Tekken World Tour this year, I wanted to debut a new video series with some Tekken content. In this series, I'll be covering the soundtracks, or OSTs, from various video games and franchises to ask the ultimate question: is the music good? In these videos, I'll share my opinion and try to offer some insight into why I enjoy certain things about the music and others not so much. Let's get started. Even though I'm a big fan of the Tekken franchise, my journey started with the second and third installments of the series. I actually never played the first game as a child or teen. This means that I'll hopefully be able to contain any nostalgic feelings when judging this game's OST. I do plan on covering the other mainline Tekken games as well though, so that's gonna be a different story. So what even makes video game OSTs good? In my eyes, there are no objective parameters we can use to rate the quality of a piece of music. For the sake of this video, I'll attempt to provide reasonable explanations from my own judgment, but keep in mind that at the end of the day, it is just that, my personal opinion. Don't take it too seriously. The Wikipedia page credits 4 people as composers for the first Tekken game. However, the IMDb page for Tekken 1994 features 2 more names in the Music By section. I found a list of the tracks with the specific credits to each individual, but it's from the Tekken fandom wiki page, so I have no idea if this information is truly accurate. The credits here are also slightly different depending on which release you look at, so there's that. I did not manage to find anything on the actual creation of the music. No articles, no behind the scenes footage. It was in the earlier part of the 90s after all. I'm not really sure what I was hoping for. Before we begin, it's important to understand the structure of the game the music is written for. As I mentioned earlier, Tekken is a fighting game, so the gameplay loop is 2 parties choosing a character and hitting each other until someone's health depletes to 0 or the timer runs out. Since the fights happen in rounds that can vary in length, the tracks are usually short but can be looped if necessary. The game offers 16 tracks in total, not including remixes, 11 of which are music for specific in-game stages. There are also a few tracks for the intro, the character select screen and other small portions of the game. Since there are differences between the arcade and the console release, I will focus on the console version but point out differences whenever they seem relevant. Let's take a listen. Number 1 is Demo BGM, or Intro, depending on where you find it. The intro music is about 20 seconds long, but it accomplishes its goal just fine. It builds up some tension so that you can get excited about the game you're about to play. It features mostly electronic sounds, and while the console version does seem to have better quality, at least on Spotify, I prefer the arcade version. The console version changes some of the notes and chords being thrown in, and the arcade version just manages to create that suspenseful feeling better than the other one. Number 2 is Character Select. This track is 20 seconds long, which is exactly how long you have to pick a character in this game. I like it quite a bit. It has a steadiness to it, while the synth melody is moving up by a half step and back down, over and over, back and forth. This really fits with the indecisiveness you're probably supposed to experience here, and it works great with the limited screen time that it gets. This one is done really well. Number 3. This one is called Windermere. Is that right? Windermere? Windermere. Most sections here sound quite dark and mysterious. They offer a good pace that works well for a fight, but for some reason it's hard for me to connect the soundtrack to the background picture they chose for the stage. I mean, look at it, it's clear daylight, grassy rocks and a nice, clean lake. I would have imagined something darker and more, I don't know, menacing? The console version is a bit clearer, which really helps to identify the instrumentation, namely the saxophone. It makes it sound like the background music for a stage that takes place in some busy town at night, which is quite the opposite of what we see in-game. A weird pairing, certainly, but as a standalone track, I actually really enjoy it, aside one pentatonic melody somewhere in the middle, which does kind of throw me off, as well as the weird drum transition they added in the PS version. There's a decent tension curve here, with busier and calmer parts going back and forth. There's some variety between those parts, and different instruments or sounds trading the spotlight. Good stuff. Number 4, Marine Stadium, and the difference between the versions is quite noticeable here. While the structure and arrangement are mostly the same, some of the sounds were changed quite a bit. Some of them not for the better in my opinion. Overall, the track is solid, it has varying parts, a good overall vibe, it moves nicely between busier and calmer parts, just like the previous one. I still enjoy listening to this, even though it doesn't appeal to me as much as Windermere. And I have to give credit for the pairing this time, as I think that this piece goes very well with the stage aesthetics. Number 5. King George Island is a cold, snowy stage. The arcade version does sell me on that vibe, to some degree, but I had expected something a bit slower, since that is what I associate with cold temperatures. Then I listened to the PS version, and it was exactly what I was hoping for. Slower tempo, a nice little intro to sell you on the stage and its climate, including a howling wind in the background and very minimalistic drumming. After that, it's basically the same as the arcade version, just slower and with better audio quality. Listening to both versions and comparing the tracks has really paid off. King George Island is probably my favorite track so far. Number 6, Acropolis. I'm kind of torn on this one. It's unique compared to the other tracks. The PS version is slower, yet again, which does help set the mood for the stage, featuring the hot and dry climate of Greece. There's nothing inherently wrong about this track, it goes well with the stage, there are no weird parts or transitions that throw me off. But when I listen to it, I feel, well, kind of bored. There's nothing all too memorable here, nothing catchy or surprising. It's just alright, but not very interesting. Number 7, Kyoto. To me, it's pretty similar to Acropolis. Not necessarily in a musical sense, but in terms of how much I enjoy it. Which is not much at all, sadly. The versions are pretty different again. The arcade version with its main theme, together with what sounds like some Japanese wooden percussion instrument and some guy yelling in the background, definitely sounds Japanese enough to suit the stage. The console features a bit of a different instrumentation, which makes it sound a bit more serious, but also somewhat hollow at the same time. It's more polished, but there's not much beneath that. Not a big fan of this one. Number 8, Monument Valley. Okay, so this is probably the one single track that I remember from playing this game some years ago. It stands out so much from the rest, it's so slow and reserved, yet all the more powerful for it. We have a short melodic theme that is interrupted by a combination of string instruments and choir singing. On top of that, there are multiple sound effects sprinkled in, namely the wailing wind and the rattling, probably intended to imitate a snake. The ambience here perfectly reflects the image of the stage, although it could also work for some dark Castlevania-type background, barring the rattling. I would praise this track on its own, since it is instantly memorable and probably the reason why I remember it from years ago. But given how musically similar the rest of the tracks are, in terms of the synth and drum sounds, tone material and even structure, Monument Valley stands out even more. One thing I don't particularly enjoy about this piece is the mix. The sound effects are very loud while the actual music is pushed to the back and the main melody sounds very thin. It's played by a bass, or a bass synth sound at least, so it should have more weight to it. Still one of the best ones so far. I'd say it's on par with King George Island. We're at number 9 already. Sichuan, or Szechwan. I don't know, there's a few different ways it's written depending on where you look in the game files or the wiki, I don't know. Sichuan, let's call it Sichuan and call it a day. I feel like this track is supposed to sound very, well, East Asian. From the get-go, we're pelted with pentatonic melodies, which is a very typical and for some a very outdated cliche to sound Asian or Oriental. I mean, it definitely works, but the way it's done here, it feels a bit forced, like they're trying too hard. In the arcade version, we get a very low repeating synth pattern beneath the pentatonic stuff. It's present throughout most of the track, but honestly it doesn't really blend too well with what happens above it. Often it feels like there is too much going on, while none of it feels powerful or memorable. The PS version is pretty similar. It has a lot more different sounds instead of just a synth bass, but the result is pretty much the same. Even more going on, but none of it really sticks. I don't even know how well it goes with the stage, because I just don't feel the music at all. Definitely a no from me. Number 10, Venezia. The intention here is clear. Create an association to Italy by implementing elements from classical music. You can hear a few melodic ideas that are reminiscent of Baroque-era counterpoint. Like, not much, but definitely enough to create some form of association. There are weird tempo changes here that do not sound like any form of agogics that you would find in Baroque or classical music. Instead, it just sounds weird and confusing. The track is not bad at all, it has some variety and some nice moments, but it's nothing to write home about. Also, there's just something about symphonic tracks with electronic drums that is very difficult to pull off. If you want something to sound classical or Baroque, why not ditch the drums for one track and make something that really stands out in your catalog? There are game composers that have done that very convincingly, in my book at least. Number 11, and finally we've arrived at the true classic of this game's OST. You don't know why? Well, once I upload my video for Tekken 2's OST you will. You might want to subscribe so you don't miss it. In all seriousness, Fiji is a very fun track. It doesn't take itself very seriously, and why should it? The stage is centered at a plain of grass with the beach in the background. The music starts off with a very upbeat, celebratory section. The groove, along with the instrumentation, creates a very relaxed atmosphere that still offers enough drive for a fight to happen. There is a B section that takes the rhythm of the A section, but turns much more dramatic very quickly. It offers nice contrast to the more uplifting part, and they flow well into one another. The only issue with the B section is that it doesn't really fit the vibe of the stage background. Like, at all. Still, I enjoy this track for the fun it offers, and while it's not up to par with my favorites, it is very catchy and nice to listen to. Number 12, Angkor Wat. Alright, I take back what I said earlier, I definitely remember this track too, especially the very beginning. I gotta say, Angkor Wat definitely reminds me of Acropolis. It sounds solid, has a decent overall vibe, but nothing all too exciting. I guess that Angkor Wat does offer more variety than Acropolis, but I don't think that's really a benefit here. Some of its sections sound a bit out of place, like they belong in a different track but were placed here instead. The PS version here is actually the longest track, beating Windermere by a single second and being almost double the average length of the other stage tracks. Maybe they could have cut out some of the parts, but even the parts that don't throw me off are nothing all too crazy. The one thing that is really memorable to me is the opening melody, which I do like a lot, but it's just not enough to carry the rest of the song. Also, I don't think it fits with the stage, but I don't really care about that either, just not my cup of tea. Number 13, Chicago. Remember what I said earlier about Windermere? Nighttime, busy town, skyline in the back? Maybe they should have swapped the stages, I don't know. Listening to the arcade version, I feel like this is what they tried to do in Sichuan as well. You know, an ongoing repeating bass line that functions as the backbone of the track, while other elements are just layered on top. I think it works quite well here. The console version offers a bit more clarity in the mix, while the bass line is not so prominent anymore, but that's not a bad thing. Overall, the tune is funky. You know, not reminiscent of the actual funk genre, but funky. It makes me want to move around and nod along, which is always good. Also, the first section of the track has a slightly dark, almost evil vibe to it. The bass is moving around its starting note chromatically, which definitely explains that partially. The high note melody that joins the bass after a few seconds offers more of a Dorian sound, going heavily against the notes present by the bass. Since they are quite far apart, it works out well, adding a good amount of tension without going overboard with it. This section is interrupted multiple times by a short interlude which keeps things interesting. The actual B section happens a bit later and offers a nice contrast to the previous material. It sounds less threatening, but keeps up the pace very well while offering some time to recover from the preceding high tension part. I must say I like it quite a bit. Number 14. Staff roll and the name entry. On the Namco Sounds Spotify, they released the arcade version of the staff roll music and the name entry music as one song, so I put them together as well. The console version does have them separated, so there's that. There's not much to say here. It sounds decent considering what its purpose in-game is, but they're both nothing to write home about. The staff roll music has something going for it. It's a bit slower than most of the other tracks, but still has a good pace and offers a bit of an evil vibe again, similar to Chicago. There's nothing bothering me here, but they are not interesting enough to listen to on their own. The name entry tune doesn't do it for me at all. I mean, it's supposed to play for a few seconds while you enter your nickname and then disappear again. It's not really fair to expect an insanely convincing composition, but yeah, I wouldn't listen to this one either. There is one more track that is not listed in the Namco Sounds Spotify album for Tekken 1. It's A Night in Chicago, and the in-game appearance of this track remains a mystery to me. I wasn't able to find out when this tune is actually audible, but we're gonna listen to it anyways. Alright, I did some research, and it seems that this track is only available on the arcade version. Don't quote me on that, but I've only found one version on YouTube, and it's that one. It's basically a rearrangement of the Chicago OST, changing some of its components, introducing new ideas here and there. It's quite long as well, being the only track that exceeds the 5-minute mark, so I guess it takes away the title as long as Tekken 1 OST. Honestly, having access to the Chicago console version, I just don't see the point of listening to this. It's too similar to be its own thing, and I'd rather listen to Chicago instead, so yeah, sadly a no from me. Alright, we've arrived at the end. Now, is the music in Tekken good? I'd say, yeah, it's alright. I like 6 of the 11 stage tracks, and the character select music is a banger as well. Even the tunes I didn't enjoy that much do fit well into the grand scheme of things, and I feel like most of the music serves the game decently. They all work as background music, and if you pay more attention to some of them, you will definitely be rewarded. Also, there are no tracks that completely stand out from the rest. It all sounds like it actually belongs to the same game. It will be interesting to compare this to the OSTs of the sequels, but considering that this is the first entry in the franchise and the time this was released in, I'd say they did a solid job. If you've stuck around until this point, thank you so much for watching. What do you think? Did you enjoy the soundtrack? And if you didn't, what did you dislike about it? Feel free to share your opinion in the comments, maybe we can get some discussion going. If you want to check out my favorite songs from this game, I've created a Spotify playlist from the official Namco Sounds releases. You can find the link in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it, it helps me grow the channel immensely. If you're interested in the Tekken 2 OST or other game soundtracks, I will be making more of these in the very near future, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay up to date. Thanks for watching, I'll see you soon. Take care.